Hello and welcome to episode 155 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have possible Rostermania news. We have at least one report, but we have some really quick matches to talk about in week 2 of the major 2 qualifiers. The Call of Duty League went by super quick this weekend, probably one of the quickest in recent memory. I know we've had a few during the podcast where it's literally like 3-0s and all but 1 or 2 matches, and that was kind of what we got this weekend. But before we dive into any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, basically the weekend of 3-0s, 10 series, 7 of them were 3-0s. And yeah, Friday and today were all 3-0s. So 2 really quick days, which, is a decent change of pace when you compare it to some of the days where it's been lengthy because of delays and, server issues and whatnot. But, um, it would be nice to have some competitive matches to balance out 3-0s, in my opinion. But nonetheless, this is what we got, and we're going to break it all down for you guys.
Yeah, we got some individual maps that were competitive, but no matches that really gave off that vibe. Especially on that first day, Friday, February 21st, we had 3 straight 3-0s. Carolina beating Minnesota, Miami beating LAG, and then, of course, Cloud9 beating the Vegas Falcons. First up, Minnesota and Carolina. I thought this would be a much more competitive series, and I also believed that Minnesota would win. We both went with the rocker with this one, and that was not meant to be. Carolina comes out. I wouldn't say that this was like a super lopsided series if we're looking like in the totality of all of the series this weekend. This is one of the more competitive 3-0s, but still for Carolina to come away and win every single one of these maps, particularly the hard point, which we've talked about in the recent past about how they struggled in hard point and what are they going to do? How are they going to fix this? Is a roster change needed? This week in particular really kind of put some of those concerns to bed, at least for the time being. What did you think of Carolina's performance in this match? And then you could even talk about this weekend if you wanted to expand on that.
Well, really, for me, for Minnesota, the thing I mentioned at the end of last week, or just when we were doing our predictions, was at least after this first match, I was having some deja vu, or just in the back of my head, it was bringing me back to Minnesota's start to the season, right, where they go 2-0 in that first week, and they had a couple game 5s, I think. And then the second week, they lost their matches to go from 2-0 to 2-2, and Minnesota loses this first match to Carolina here. Like you said, it wasn't necessarily a super lopsided 3-0. It wasn't the closest 3-0, but end of the day, it's a loss. And now I was just thinking in the back of my head, here we go again. Minnesota is going to do this thing where, they go 2-0 first week and 0-2 and the second week, and basically just like cancel it out. Like 2-2 is better than being winless, obviously. But it's not. If it were to happen again, it would have been Minnesota not capitalizing on a strong first week of qualifiers for the second time in a row this season. Obviously, we'll get into Minnesota a little bit more with their second match, and that's not what happened. But maybe if it was a different team they played for the second match, It might have been. But end of the day, yeah, this was a big win for Carolina, really. Again, we'll talk more about Carolina too, but we were talking last week about if Carolina, on their schedule, they were playing Minnesota, who was looking good last week and had been one of those teams that's just like,
been on the upswing.
Yeah, exactly. Carolina outplaced them at the major, but Minnesota, I bet if just because Minnesota's played so many game 5s at this point, they probably played more maps than Carolina, and they've faced some adversity too. They're a team I've been positive on, and I just like you said, we both picked Minnesota to win here, despite Carolina probably being considered the favorite, but end of the day, Carolina took care of business here, and it could have looked. What I was saying was we were talking last episode about Carolina potentially, at least considering a roster move if in theory they went 0-2 this week. That's out the window at this point, because that's not at all what happened for him. So this is a big win for that current lineup to, show what they were capable of. And I think it might have been after this match or their second match, I don't know, but they did a post game interview with Vivid after one of Carolina's wins, and I believe it was nameless. It might have been Puckett, I can't remember, but somebody asked him about like Envoy's comments on Gwyn. And he was basically like, yeah, I saw, we didn't think too much of it, and he played pretty well. I think it was his first series. He's like, yeah, he played pretty well. So think it, I think the Carolina camp is just, rolling with the punches, and Gwen keeps playing the way he's playing. If it leads to wins, that's what they're gonna probably rely on, just because he's been, obviously TJ's played well in spurts, especially at the major. Slasher's had his moments online really this year so far, which is weird to think about, but yeah, big win for Carolina here, especially after their 0-2 start in the previous week. And like we said on the previous show, potentially if they struggled this week heading into the minor, they might have, and especially if they struggled this week and at the minor, I would have been surprised if they weren't at least considering roster changes, but that's probably out the window right now.
Yeah, Gwyn also had a very good weekend, all things considered. 1.33 respawn KD, a 1.67 KD in search. Of course, that's 2 series, so it's small, but still, like, I mean, they're going to take that, especially if they're going to go 3-0 in both of those series against 2 teams that you would expect to be like in the top half of the league at this point, and maybe one of those teams is not in the top half of this league at this point.
And not we sometimes on the podcast try to make comparisons or analogies to sports, and it's not the best for the sake of comparison, just because a 4-team team is different than any professional sports team, really. Even basketball's 5 guys, but I mean that it's just so different.
The closest, yeah.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate with Envoy's comments on Gwyn, like, there were, before Giannis got his first MVP, there were years where those Bucks teams weren't great, but he was like slowly building up to, a all-star MVP caliber player. And there were obviously nights where, he was dropping triple doubles or, 30 points, whatever, 10 rebounds, maybe not 10 assists, but you get what I'm getting at. Yeah. There were nights where Giannis would have really good games and the Bucks would lose by double digits, probably, right? And that's what, I'm not saying Envoy doesn't know what he's talking about when he says that Gwyn's just playing for stats. I don't, if Envoy thinks that, I am in no position to argue against that, because he's a world champion, a really smart player and all that. But even if that's what it appears to be, like there's inevitably going to be situations in competitive Call of Duty where players or the best player on your team are playing really well and the rest of the team's just not having a good night and they end up getting stomped. And then that's when it could raise questions of like, oh, this guy's just baiting his teammates and he's just trying to post a 1.5 KD. And you would expect that more on a team that's struggling. Probably like a Boston team last year, not saying it actually happened, but like one of the Vegas Legion or Paris Legion teams in the past, like if towards the end of the year, you're trying to improve your stock or how the community and potential other team owners and GMs perceive you, like you might be baiting a little bit there and not, but I don't, everything I've seen from Gwyn so far doesn't suggest that's the type of player he is. I think he's pretty good, and it's there's going to be days where he has good maps and the rest of his team doesn't, and then it might not look great if other people are saying he's just not doing things on the map to help the team. So I don't know, it's weird, but end of the day they were able to get this win here, and we'll just have to see how Carolina builds on this. Obviously, we'll get to them in a little bit, but this was a strong week from them, and it's a little more indicative of the form we have come to expect from them based on their early season performance online and in Major 1.
I've heard the idea of a player who puts up bad stats or puts up good stats on a bad team. I've heard it referred to as like an empty calories player, and I think that's a that's a good way to put it, but at the same time, I think people get that reputation simply because they haven't won yet. And that is, I think, the biggest point here for Gwyn. It's like he's only been in the league less than a year and a half.
Yeah.
He obviously has a lot of talent, and you could even extend this to Gio and the comments that JCat made before the season about him and how he plays selfishly. I think you play selfishly or you're not a team player until your team wins, and then you're just a really talented player. And Dashy had this reputation for years. Like OpTic would be very good in the regular season, and then they would come up short of their ultimate goal of winning a world championship. And Dashy got a lot of blame or got a lot of flack for that because he put up incredible stats, regardless a lot of times of whether they won or lost. But then last season they win the world championship, and he gets a lot of credit for what he did on that team. And he even said like maybe he changed his mentality, but he didn't change his play style like 180 degrees. It wasn't like he was a completely different player. He changed things here or there, and that's maybe what Gwyn has to do, or maybe he will do it naturally as he matures and progresses. But I think a lot of this is a little premature in terms of like criticism of players, and especially young players who are still kind of finding themselves and trying to prove themselves in the CDL. I just, I don't think it's much of an issue. And obviously, it was not an issue at all this weekend for Carolina, based on their record. Next up, we have Miami and LAG. Another 3-0, of course, another series that we both got wrong. We both picked LAG, which this was the first match with Lunars in the lineup. And obviously, Miami had, didn't do great last week. They've been kind of, I would say up and down is probably not like the right way to put it, but we're just not entirely sold on them as like a, top level team, of course. And obviously LAG was not considered that to be either. And I saw a lot of criticism, I guess, or just a lot of kind of negative Nancy's on Twitter after this series in particular in regards to Lunars. And, like he wasn't like the guy to like bring them back to, I don't know, respectability. I don't know like if that was the right way to put it, but it did feel like it was kind of piling on, or there was like just a lot of criticism I wasn't expecting for a first match. What did you think of LAG in Miami?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, we both obviously bought in a little bit to the honeymoon phase. Especially a week removed from Neptune coming into Vancouver Surge and them taking down FaZe and winning both their matches right after a roster change. And the other component here that wasn't really talked about is nobody knew until the match started whether Metals was going to play for Miami or if Super was going to play again. I think if Super plays again, it's just another situation where we got a sub playing against a new roster, and then I think it's more of a toss up. But Metals is a little bit more of a known quantity. Not like I'm saying Metals is like a make or break player for Miami to win, but he's proven what he's capable of and shown what he can do on the server, and he's just more of a known quantity at this point than Super. So it would make more sense if we knew Metals was playing. Maybe that sways our mind a little bit in the predictions, but nonetheless, I didn't see as much of the hate or criticism towards Lunars as you mentioned, but what I noticed and what I thought I saw was comments around just LAG search and destroy woes continuing. And we talked last episode, I believe they are 0-5 in game fives, I believe,
I think
and
so,
just
yeah.
the search hasn't been there for them. And they had an opportunity here to change that, but they went up 5-2 in the map too, and Miami just won 4 rounds in a row to make a comeback. And there were some winnable rounds. It was on protocol, so we know protocol is a little bit of a it's on the same page as Vault for me for search and destroy, where it's very heavily focused on that one bomb site down low. And there's some rounds where the teams just try and 3-hit. Both teams are head bashing into that bottom site trying to get control. And there were some rounds where it felt like LAG could have closed it out, but they weren't able to get it done. And I think that was probably you know, what I saw the most comments on about this team was it just like, I don't know if Lunars was expected to come in and be this S&D savior, but obviously in this short sample size that wasn't the case here. And it's just, that it's funny in my mind how, like, you can look at a team like Vancouver and they go 2-0 in their first week with Neptune, and it's all like, oh my god, they're the best team in the world. And then another team makes a change and they don't go 2-0 in their first week. It's like, oh my god, yeah. Like, it's not like Lunars got absolutely spit on and he was the reason why this Gentlemates team didn't beat Miami. Like we even pointed out last week when we were picking LAG, like Miami's coming off a third placing in the major. We just didn't know what the starting roster was going to be for this one. And, Gentlemates haven't had the best season with or without Lunars at this point. So I think even I was listening briefly before we went live to the flank. It just seems like there are bigger, issues behind the scenes. And I think somebody, maybe it was Ben, mentioned something about like Gotaga commenting on stream. I didn't see what he actually said or a clip of it, but this is a team that it's got the pieces, it just hasn't been able to put it together yet. And this was an example here of like, a team that struggled in search to this point. They had a chance to finally like put a tally in the search column and be like, yeah, we got a search win here. And they let it slip through their fingers, and then they end up losing the series. So it's a tough one for Lunars in the Gentlemates debut, but not every player can, enter the CDL and win his first match. It statistically can't happen.
Yeah. And that S&D is, we talked about it before they made this roster change. And we said like, maybe that's a potential point of focus in whatever player that they were going to go with was an S&D kind of like almost savant, maybe, but like just a player that can help them in that specific mode more so than the rest, because they're about 500 in Respawn, but they had like a 25% win percentage in S&D. And I believe they were the worst S&D team outside of Vegas in the league. And you just can't, like, the saying is S&D wins championships, but even like they just can't get to game fives because sometimes they're just going to lose, in 3 or 4 maps like they did this weekend. And then obviously like this weekend they lost 2 round 11s. So like that's just a heartbreaker, like to be that close to not just 1 but 2 S&D wins, and who knows where that series goes after that if you're able to pull off a search win. And they just weren't able to do that. And we'll get to it just a little bit later when we talk about their second match, but it looks like another roster change might be coming for LAG, and that's pretty surprising considering what we thought of this team before the season and where they are right now. Next up, we had C9 versus Vegas. Obviously, not a lot to say here. I don't think we both expected C9 to win. They did. They nearly 100-point clubbed Vegas in the first hard point, which was the 18th straight hard point loss for the Falcons this season. They have not won a hard point so far. And then there was a 6-4 S&D win, a 3-1 control. I feel like our Vegas segments, and anytime we talk about them, it's going to get increasingly shorter and more brief as we go on this season. Do you have anything to say on something we all expected?
No, I mean, that's just really like, I don't think it was too long ago where I said this, but you kind of, I think a little bit quicker than me were like, yeah, I mean, this is just the reality, comparing it to, Vegas to past Boston last year, some of the other historically bad CDL teams, in the sense of like, we're just not going to spend as much time talking about them until they give us something to talk about, right? And I was like, yeah, I tried to be positive for a little longer than I probably should have, and I was like, I've seen some flashes of potential and some rays of hope, however you want to phrase it, and now it's just at that point where it's like, they really, no matter what the roster iteration has been and all that, there really just isn't anything to write home about right now with this Vegas squad. Was watching the Scump watch party today, and Methods was pretty blunt about it too. He was just like, they're just not a pro level team at this point, and like he's like, I feel bad about the position they're in because they were given this opportunity and they haven't, I forget how he worded it exactly, but it's basically like they instead of having a team and then having the Saudi players compete in challengers, and then if some of those Saudi players shined in challengers, you could pick and plug them into the main roster. They were just like thrown into the fire right away, and it hasn't worked out yet. It's not. I don't think trying not to be disrespectful or anything like that, but I really don't think it's disrespectful at this point to just say like they haven't shown that they belong at this point. And I still think inevitably it's really getting hard, but I do think inevitably they're gonna win a hard point and they're gonna win a series. But it's getting more bleak just by each series. I'm just like, man, maybe it's actually not gonna happen, and then we're gonna have a longer conversation if that does become the reality for the Vegas Falcons 2025 season. I know I brought this up, I think probably in our wish list episode or something like during the holiday break, but like everything we've heard so far about Vegas Falcons makes it sound like they are committed to the Saudi roster experiment, but we've seen it with the Falcons' involvement in other esports where they have just spent a lot of money, or at least in theory or reportedly spent a lot of money on superstar rosters with non-Saudi players. And it, it feels like if this experiment fails this year, they have that option open to them if they want to go down that route next season. And they would obviously be more competitive than what we've seen this year. But if they want to stay, committed to the all Saudi experiment, then that's their option as team owners and whatnot. But that also gives us the option to, sit here and not talk much when their team continually gets pummeled.
Yeah, and it also opens up the possibility for people to resent them, and even the players themselves, even though that's not fair. Like they're in this position, and I'm sure they want to be in this position, but the feeling is that they haven't deserved this. They're not worthy of these spots, and they've proven that in how they played. Granted, we've seen in the past, like there are just random teams each season. The Boston Breach last season, the Vegas or the Paris Legion a few seasons ago, where they proved like they're just not on the level of these other teams on a consistent basis. Yes, they can get close, they can win matches on occasion, but they're just not good enough to compete against the top level players and teams in Call of Duty esports. That being said, the Vegas Falcons appear to be the worst of any of those teams that we've had in the CDL era. I can't remember before the CDL era other than Epsilon, and they were one of the worst, and it was made abundantly clear by fans, media, and the players themselves that they knew that they were the worst. I feel bad for the players because that it sucks for them, I'm sure, to be on this bad team and get the hate and criticism that I'm sure they're getting. At the same point, though, like that is just like part of the deal, I guess, right? If Challengers players were in their position and they were stinking it up in the CDL, I think people would criticize those players as well for different reasons. But they would still get criticized and be told that they're not good enough. So I think it's only fair that we do that with Vegas. And we don't have a lot to talk about with their matches because they're just like it's a surprise when they win a map, let alone if they win a series, which will be like we'll probably end the podcast that day just to make sure that people can go out and celebrate. But it's bad, and I think they had another match later in this week. So we'll briefly talk about it again.
Yeah, I feel like you said, I feel for the players just in the sense of like, like you said,
you take it. You want that opportunity.
Definitely can shoot back and they can shoot straight, but just like putting it all together, it just hasn't worked. And that's where like I feel for Clayster as well, because again, going with sports analogies here, I can't think, like, there have obviously, as a Browns fan, not throwing shots, but there have been Browns teams that go 0-16, 0-17, whatever it was. The Colts, I think, had an O for season, like, before they got Andrew Luck. But I don't think the coaches were like rookie coaches on those teams. Those were just bad teams that didn't win. And I think Chuck Pagano was the coach of the Colts before, and then he got Luck. I don't really remember. But regardless, like, this is Clayster's first season coaching after retiring, and you're a big Clayster guy. I really like Clayster as well. His last few years competing did not go as well as he would have hoped, and I think he would probably be pretty open about that. And then you have some struggles towards the end of your playing career, transitioning into coaching, and your first year of coaching is on a team that possibly might not win a series or a hard point for the entire year. Like, that's got to be tough. And he's had some stuff going on in his personal life too. It can't be easy for him, and it just makes me wonder, like, how much can we really evaluate Clayster as a coach? I feel like it's almost impossible based on this season alone. Like, if he was the coach of another team and it was an NA team that didn't have the excuses that we're saying, like new players and playing against NA talent for the first time, yada yada, all that stuff we said about Vegas. If he was a coach of another team, like let's just use Minnesota as an example, and Minnesota was struggling, we would probably say similar things like, it's a young Vegas team, Clayster's in his first year, like we got to give him some time. But then we play devil's advocate, and let's just say Clayster was the coach of OpTic this year after OpTic wins champs, and OpTic goes through this little winless spurt here. Then you're probably sitting here like, what's Clayster got to do differently as a coach? All this, yada yada. And I know those are some weird examples, probably just because it's not the reality we're in. But I think it is worth at least mentioning that Clayster's got to be having a rough time with this, and I feel like he's a good person to be coaching a roster that's doing an experiment like this, just because he is so talented as a COD player and is really smart as a Call of Duty mind. So he's like, if you want somebody teaching raw talent the fundamentals and what they should and shouldn't be doing on the map at times, Clayster is one of those guys at the top of the list, I feel like. But it's obviously just not translating to the matches themselves, and I feel like that's got to be tough on him and the squad in general.
Yeah, I don't know how to judge coaches in general, especially assistant coaches. Fortunately, I think nobody would hold it against him, like the result or the performance of this team in particular. And I don't think a lot of people would say, like, look at what Clay did, and look how bad of a coach he is. So I think if he wants another chance with another team next year or 2 years from now, I think he would get that. Depending on the circumstance, of course. But it's weird. Like, coaches in general, I'm not entirely convinced of like who makes the biggest impact, like who, we don't even know what some of these coaches are doing on a day-to-day basis. It's not the same as like a traditional sports coach where you kind of understand what like a head coach of a football team does or head coach of a basketball team. It's different in Call of Duty, and especially with like analysts and assistant coaches, like the responsibilities of each of those people can vary team to team, and we don't really know all that much about them. Then we had Saturday, February 22nd. The first match was not a 3-0, surprisingly. It was close because we had a round 11 win for the Miami Heretics on S&D, but they lost 3-1 to the Atlanta FaZe. So Atlanta, they do not lose their opener of this week like they did last week. They kind of get back on track. And I mean, they won their second match last week, but I feel like it's like, okay, we're good now. And, so they win. Any overall thoughts on this? It kind of looked like Atlanta just kind of being Atlanta. Like they weren't flawless by any means, but it did feel like they had this series in control.
Yeah, that's where I'm going to go with it, honestly. Like, map one in particular, Simp was absolutely frying, and he kind of slowed down towards the end, but the rest of the team, like everybody combined, had at least 30 kills. And I can't think of how many times we've seen that in this game so far this season. So that stood out to me. But really the map too is what stood out the most to me here is a 6-5 loss for um Atlanta, and Vault S&D again. I've talked about it. Feels like a lot recently, but just in general, it's a map that um can get a little mixy and just be offensively favored, where teams are just hitting that bottom site trying to get control, and then you gotta head rush in with 2-3 guys to try and get control back. And if they have 3 guys in there, you only send 2 and you don't get the trades. Like it's just, it can be a chaotic search map, at least from a spectator's perspective. And this one is one where Atlanta had a 4-1 lead, and Miami comes back and wins 6-5. It wasn't consecutive. I don't know. I don't remember when FaZe won their 5th round. But there were several rounds in that streak at the end there that Atlanta could have closed out. I'm pretty sure they had a 4v2 when they were up 5-4, or maybe it was the round. I don't think it was the round 11, but regardless, there were several winnable rounds in that search, and they weren't able to close it out. So that was a little, raised an eyebrow for me, and I was like, oh, what the hell's going on here? But then, like you said, after that, the protocol control Simp goes 32-15, just a casual 2KD. And then in the Hacienda hardpoint, Atlanta were up like over 100 points. It was like 150-15. And Miami did like make it competitive towards the end. It was getting to that point where it was like Miami started clawing back, and I was like, oh, they're only down 100 now. Here we go. They're only down 50 now, and that's when it was like a 50-point game again. I was like, Miami's one solid hold away from tying this up realistically, and it doesn't end up happening. But that was one where it was like, I'm really confused what's going on here. But Atlanta were able to close it out. And then at the end we get a tweet from Real, which both of us have sung our praises of Real as a player since his debut last year. But this is probably the most vocal I've ever seen him. And he just tweets, "This league is an effing joke. GG's FaZe lost 3-1." And it makes you think if there was something going on with the server being a little more unfavorable for the Miami guys and favoring Atlanta a little bit, but that would be it wouldn't make a ton of sense to me, just because like Atlanta playing from Atlanta, Miami playing from Miami, like they should have had a good server to ping to, you would think. But I don't know, that was the speculation on the Scump watch party, was maybe some server shenanigans were going on, and that's what led to the tweet. But we don't know much more beyond that tweet. So I mean I like seeing the fire from Real. Kind of sucks that he picked that to be his tweet though, because he will probably get hit by a fine if I had to guess. But end of the day, yeah, this was a match we expected Atlanta to win. They do get the win. Looked pretty strong in the respawns. The search was a little. I'm just when the team is as strong as they have been, you got to pick and choose what you're critical of, I guess. And I don't think I'm being super critical here, but it felt like a map they should have won, that map too, and they let it slip away. So gonna be interesting to see if Atlanta hits like a lull in search or something going forward. I don't expect them to, but I'll have my eyes out for it.
Yeah, it's a weird situation with the server stuff, and I just don't understand it in general. Like I'm confused on how the process works, and like, like you said, Atlanta, Miami, it's about as close as CDL teams get, like when they're actually playing from their home base, and that would make it seem straightforward in where the server should be for that game. But I guess I guess we're speculating, but it didn't seem as straightforward based on that tweet. Next up, Carolina OpTic. Man, this is I don't know, like OpTic just, they kind of stink. Like they've been really bad. Like this was not a very close series. They lost by over 100 in hardpoint. They got dominated in search and destroy, and then they lose control and they lose round 5 on defense, which is pretty crazy. And now, like, not only are they, this is their only match this week, so they go winless this week. They went winless last week as well, not once but twice. So they're 0-3 in matches and 0-9 in map count so far in the Major 2 qualifiers. And now they have to kind of sit on that for a week because we have the minor next week, so those matches don't count toward the qualifier standings. And they are very much in danger of starting Major 2 in the losers bracket, which is not what you want to hear, especially because I believe they're hosting Major 2. So there's a possibility that they could get first rounded, and at least they don't have to drive very far back home if they do get first rounded. But they're in a very bad state, and I'm shocked by that. I saw people basically dancing on OpTic's grave on Twitter after this, saying like that's what you get for dropping Hook. I don't feel as strongly about that, but I'm still stunned that, like, I could understand if they came out flat and it took a little bit of time to get back on their feet after a roster change, reintegrating Pred back into this lineup. I did not expect 9 straight losses off the top. I did not expect them to be this out of their depth, basically. What do you think is going wrong, and what do you think this is salvageable soon, or like what can OpTic do in the next week or two to really fix what's going wrong now?
I mean, I think it has to be salvageable just from the sense of, we know what this team's ceiling is. That's winning a world championship and lifting a trophy. We know how talented all the guys on this team are. We know the coaching staff behind them, and JP and Karma, like, we know they got the brains to fix all this. It's just going to come down to putting it all together. And, so they have the pieces, but it's just not clicking right now, and something's got to be done. I don't think I put the tweet in here, but I saw it. I think it was Money Hill Stats might have been the one who tweeted it. But it was comparing Atlanta to OpTic. Yeah, so here it is. Atlanta start 0-3 during Major 1 qualifiers, with their third L being a 3-0 sweep by the Ravens. Their next game was against Falcons, and that started their 12-series win streak, which ended with winning Major 1. Texas start 0-3 during Major 2 qualifiers, with their third loss being a sweep by the Ravens. Their next match is against the Falcons. So if OpTic fans want to believe in the similarities there and have some hope, like, that's something they can bank on. Maybe this is the start of a magical run for this squad. But I do think that's the silver lining here for OpTic, is their next match is against Vegas Falcons. And if they lose to Vegas Falcons, then I think that is the ultimate red flag, just based on everything we've seen from Vegas this year. That would be like, obviously there are definitely Greenwell fans who are concerned at this point with the 09 map count since Pred's return. But if they aren't able to get it done against Vegas, like, that's like, it's going to be time to start having some serious conversations about this team and what they got to do and potential roster changes, yada, yada. But I do think, maybe the minor will be, the change of pace that they need. So, similar to Atlanta, like, Atlanta won that minor and they went on a run after that. And maybe it was just like the quote unquote tournament environment or something that, like, got Atlanta, like, kicking into gear, however you want to phrase it. Maybe that same thing can happen here with this, OpTic team. Like I said, we know what they're capable of. We know how much talent they have. It's just nothing's been working right now and going their way. Credit to Carolina here too for getting the job done. I'm pretty sure I saw, obviously it was a different roster at minor 1, but I believe this is 12 straight maps that they lost. And I'm pretty sure, because I mentioned it last episode, since Carolina eliminated OpTic at Major 1, OpTic won their only hard point of the tournament against Carolina in map 1. Then Carolina won 3 maps in a row to win 3-1. And then it's these 9 maps in a row. And I believe the map 1 that OpTic won, it was like a 2-point game or a 5-point game on protocol hard point. I'm pretty sure it was on protocol, which is the hard point that they played here. And Carolina wins this one by 110 points. So that's like, the one map Carolina is won, or sorry, the one map OpTic has won in their last 4 series. They also lose in this one with a different roster. That's, it is what it is. That's just a stat. If it is true, I'm pretty sure it is. But the other thing, the red card search wasn't close. Like they were just, it felt like, you know, uh, Carolina was in complete control. I'm pretty sure, Carolina, it was a 6-1, and Carolina had first blood in 6 of the 7 rounds. So, when you're playing against a structured S&D team as we expect Carolina to be, they get first blood, they're going to capitalize on it and, make the plays and, try and force out situations that favor them when they have a man advantage. But also just got to shout out TJ, because TJ seems to be the OpTic Reaper this year when they played him. I know we mentioned at Major 1, he played really well against OpTic, and again, he had a 1.54 KD in this series, and I think it was a graphic either on the Scum Watch Party or the CDL broadcast showing like TJ against Pred. I think it was 6-2 or 7-2 record heading into this series. So somewhere around there, TJ is played pretty well against Pred, which is funny because I mentioned it at either last episode or one ago. Like those are two guys in that like 2K group that plays NBA 2K sometimes off on stream, and it's good entertainment. So they're close friends, but obviously that matchup's gone TJ's way so far this year and historically so far, which is interesting.
I was just looking it up. OpTic has lost 7 of their last 8 hardpoint maps. Dating back to the beginning of Major 1, they lost both hardpoints to both Miami and LAG at Major 1. Yep. Then, like you said, they beat Carolina in that first hardpoint. They lost in the second hardpoint, and they've lost everyone since then. Granted, there's only been 3 in these qualifiers, but still 7 of the last 8, which is across 2 of the roster iterations now, of course, with Hook in the Major 1 roster, and then since then with Pred. That's just shocking. Like, this is a team, and we've talked about this plenty, how OpTic traditionally is a respawn heavy team, a lot of times simply because they have so much slaying power on that given roster that they can just overwhelm teams and just kind of double up and just demolish them just with how much killing they're doing. And it just, even with Hook in, even with Pred in, it hasn't seemed to matter much recently, and that's concerning. I do agree with you. If they do lose the Vegas roster change, we're bringing someone in. Like, there's just no way that could continue. I don't know if they would want to continue with that roster, because I could only imagine the turmoil that would be within that team, because Vegas hasn't even gone to a game 5 so far this season. I don't believe they've won 2 maps in a series so far this season. I think they've maybe won 5 maps total this entire year. So they would basically nearly
won a hard point. It makes sense.
Yeah, they've so literally they would almost be doubling their map win loss if they were able to win a series. And I don't think it's happening. Like, I want to say that off the bat. I don't think that OpTic is going to lose to Vegas. But if it did happen, if Vegas were to eliminate OpTic Texas from the first round of the minor, I do believe OpTic Texas would be making a roster change very swiftly. I don't know who it would be. I don't know who's out, who's in. I would imagine Kenny's out, just like because that's been the conversation like around the team, I guess, over the last few weeks. But that would just be insane. And I thought about this after I watched the Carolina match this week, and I literally thought after they lost, I was like, man, they really stink. I'm fully expecting them to win Major 2 now. Like, this is like the OpTic Texas experience. Like, they are up and they're super up, and then they're down and they're super down. And right now they're super down. They're at one of the lowest points that I can remember for this team in the CDL era. And we talked about exactly that right before champs last season. They were at an incredibly low point, and then they went on to win Call of Duty League Championship. So I'm expecting them to win Major 2. And it's probably an uphill battle. It's probably going to not look like possible for the bracket, especially if they start in the losers bracket, which means that they're going to have to go through like, whatever 7-8 matches just to win that tournament. But they have the talent to do it, and we've seen in the past that they're able to overcome the adversity that they're kind of putting themselves through. So OpTic is in a bad way, but I fully expect them to rebound like they always have in the past. Next up, we have LAG and Vancouver, another non-3-0. It was another 3-1. We had a ton of round 11 searches this weekend, even though we didn't have really competitive matches or a ton of like long series. But this one, Vancouver wins their round 11 S&D. LAG avoids the sweep, but Vancouver ends up winning another match, and I believe this made them 3-0 with Neptune in the lineup. Neptune was getting gassed on the timeline like nobody's business. Rightfully so. Like, he was having an incredible series, and he's basically been, like, over the last 2 weeks, like, you could argue he's been the best player in the CDL or one of the best players. And this was a guy that hadn't been in the CDL in like 2.5 years. So, congrats to him. Any thoughts on Vancouver and LAG? Of course, this on the flip side, LAG, this does make them 0-2 with Lunars. And, we'll talk about it afterward, I guess. But what did you think of the match?
Yeah, the match really was the Neptune show, and he's just proven so far. Again, it's only 3 matches. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but he seems to have been the perfect pickup for this squad. Obviously, in the first match against Atlanta FaZe, we mentioned he played well, but really nasty, kind of just took over in that series. But in the other 2 series, it really feels like Neptune has been that standout guy for this squad, and it bodes well, I think, for Vancouver that, small sample size, I know, but just hear me out in the sense that, like, Neptune has the potential to play well, be that top slayer that you needed to add to the team. But also, even if he isn't being that top slayer, like, he still is having a positive impact and, like, helping the rest of the team in the sense of, like, just providing a boost, I guess, or, elevating the players around him, even if he statistically isn't having the best map, which we really haven't seen him have a quote unquote bad map yet, I don't think. But map 1 of this series, he literally went on an 11 streak on the red card, and it was like, it got to the point where, like, he was getting 3-4 man down during that streak, and then he was just able to run to another spot, and they were like, LAG just didn't even know to expect him to be there. He was just like running around doing whatever he wanted and picking up 2-3 pieces like it was his job, and ended up dropping 42 in that map. Lunars did play pretty well, all things considered, 32 and 30. But that was the standout one for me. That map in particular, too, red card hardpoint, it didn't go to 250. It was 201 to 140. That was one of the few times we've seen a map come to time this year, so that was worth noting too. But yeah, just in general, Neptune seems to be the perfect piece right now for this squad. 114 kills in the series and a 1.31 KD, just, monster numbers out of a guy who literally wasn't in the league 2 weeks ago, and now he's dropping the most kills. And again, I mean, it's against the Gentlemate squad that hasn't looked the best, but Neptune has certainly shown what he's capable of and that he belongs in this short sample size so far.
Yeah, I'm shocked because I'm always pretty skeptical of a player coming back into the CDL and that they can make a negligible impact, or not negligible, that was the wrong word, but make an actual noticeable impact on the team. I've talked about it before with like Gunless, where I'm just like, there are players that haven't been given a shot, and I think they deserve to be, and they're just kind of unknown. Maybe they can actually make a difference on a team. So even when Neptune was announced, I know that he had success in challengers, but yeah, I was still kind of skeptical that he could make that translate back into the CDL after an unsuccessful stint with New York and then LAG previously. That has just turned out to be completely, wrong and, off base. And, really it's a testament to how much work he's put in and how well he fits within Vancouver that a team that we thought was very stale and just had no kind of direction after Major 1, and now they look like a completely different team. And granted, this is LAG. LAG is having their own issues, but still, like, Vancouver in general looks like a really solid team, one that can make a run at like a top 4, top 5 placing and rise up the standings very quickly if they continue to win. So congrats to Neptune, congrats to Vancouver. They're doing really incredible work. On the other side, though, LAG, it looks like this is according to Crone, and Mink and I were talking about this before the show went on the air. We hadn't seen anybody else report it, and I didn't even see Crone say anything more about this. But he said that Priesta is reportedly expected to replace Skies in the LAG lineup. Of course, Priesta had just been benched by LAG for Lunars before this week. And we had talked about that, I think, last episode, maybe it was. But we talked about how Priesta was not released from LAG. He was simply benched, and there was even a statement made by D. Rio, the head coach of the Gentlemates, and he said that he was looking forward for Priesta to basically help the team out however he could. And it looks like, he's coming back, at least according to this report by Crone. And I think that's really interesting. I don't know if that's the right move. Right on that last point about like former players kind of being put back in or like coming back into the CDL and trying to make an impact. We just saw Priesta on this roster. Of course, it's different because if he's in place of Skies, like his role might change, or the teamwork within the team could change. But I just don't know if Priesta is the solution to this team, especially, like he's not like this S&D god, which is what they really need. They need someone that can help them just find some kind of stability in search, just get them, win half of their searches would be an improvement. And I'm just not entirely sold on this move. What do you think of Priesta potentially replacing Skies and coming back into the LAG lineup?
Yeah, so like you said, we don't know for sure if this is happening, if, Ego Chall tradition sticks to what we've had in the past. It's very possible Gentlemates will announce this tomorrow, and then we'll just sound like idiots with, being speculative about it. But at least at the time of recording, we don't know for sure what's going on with Gentlemates. But the one thing that I was I don't think I was necessarily adamant, but for lack of a better word, the one thing I was pointing out with this Lunars roster move before it was confirmed is just we, as Call of Duty competitive fans who don't watch a ton of challengers, we were not 100% on Lunar's just play style or quote unquote role, whether it was a hard main AR or like a flex player, AR/SMG who could do it with both guns. And that was the one thing, with like Neptune coming in for Hixie for Vancouver, we knew Neptune from the past being a sub player, replacing a sub player, not going to be any issues there. But the one thing I knew I had said was like with Lunars, we don't really know, especially with the way the meta has evolved in some extent in recent times right now. Like I know I mentioned it for one of LAT's matches last week, I believe, like Ghosty pulling out a third sub on Vault Hardpoint. Like, you're seeing that third sub a little bit more, and we talked about it with LAG Gentlemates with Priesta doing it on Skyline. Like, we're seeing that a little bit more on some of these maps, and that was my question with Lunars coming in. Was he going to be that player who was willing to pull out a third sub, or was that going to fall to Skies? And we just haven't really seen that from Skies throughout his career. He's been more of that just, solid main AR type player. But I'm pretty sure that I saw him at some point. I just went back and looked. I think it was their first. It had to have been because it wasn't here. Maybe it was the Vault Control against Vancouver, but Vault Hardpoint was the first map for Gentlemates against Miami. I'm pretty sure I did see at some point Sky's using a third sub, so that's interesting. But it would, if that's what they're going for here with like Lunars being the main AR, bringing Priesta back in to be more of that flex makes sense from that extent to me. But I just don't know how much this really changes things. And I think to your point and what I was talking about earlier too, in terms of like the S&D woes for this team. Like I think Skies is a really good clutch S&D player. He's in his 1v1 situations. He was really well known over the last couple of years for successfully converting those 1v1s into round wins. And I think Priest over the years, he's been on good S&D teams, and he's a solid S&D player. But just whatever the case is right now, and I know I mentioned it either last episode or before, just about like, that NYSL team that won champs had Sender as an S&D coach, and that was really they had some strong nade lineups and wall bang spots and like Invasion, Search and Destroy, I remember. And not having Sender as like in the S&D or just a coach in general for this segment of the NYSL team could be affecting their search play in general. So one thing, I mean, obviously we don't know for sure what's going on with the roster change right now. It sounds like Priest is coming in for Skies. I just don't know how much that moves the needle. But if that happens and it doesn't really change much for Gentlemates, one thing that, wouldn't be the craziest in my eyes would be they drop or just bench Skies or Priesta and they pick up Fellow. Like Fellow and Lunars have had success in challengers this year as an AR duo. We know, Fellow comes from that Fizzer prospect tree of, S&D kids from back in the Black Ops 2 Ghost days. We know he's a strong S&D player. He could be like that leadership presence for this squad for the young guys and Lunars and Lens. And like I said, we know Fellow and Lunars have worked well together, so it wouldn't be the craziest thing to me if that's, something that Gentlemates decide to do to if they continue to struggle in search specifically, because I do think, I don't know how well, obviously I know Fellow's team has played well this year, but I don't know like his numbers in hardpoint. He's never been that guy who's, dropping 35 plus kills and a 1.5 KD in hardpoint. Like he can do it here and there, but that's not what he's known for. He's known for, being the being the S&D guy and doing the jobs he needs to do in the respawns. So I don't know how much that pickup would change things for Gentlemates in the respawns, but I do think if they were looking for like we need to improve in S&D, how do we fix this? Fellow seems like an option to me. It's just something that came to mind here.
Yeah, I think we talked about it when I think it was when Neptune got picked up or was being considered to be picked up by Vancouver, and like maybe these teams should just pick up like challengers teams, and obviously Lunars and Fellow and Neptune all played on that Omit Brooklyn team, and if it's not broken, it's like just continue to bring them in, and maybe Fellow isn't the answer, and okay, you found that out, but I think that it feels like the Priesta move, if this happens and he replaces Skies, I feel like this is just another roster change that will, it precedes another roster change. I don't see this being the solution, and they figure it out right there, and they're able to go on and make a run later on this season. I just don't see that happening, and I can be proven wrong. I have been very recently, so I expect to completely be proven wrong in that respect. And then the last match on Saturday was Boston versus Toronto. We actually get to a game 5, the first one, I believe the only one of this entire week. Boston, they win the opening hardpoint, lose the next 2 maps, force a game 5. They win both hardpoints in this series, and then lose 6-4 on Skyline S&D. Heartbreaker for my boys. The Breach, especially with how the end of the week finished off. Not a great week for Boston. But Toronto, this is, especially with how they needed this win, especially with the team that they had to play on Sunday. Them going 0-2 in this week it would be a really bad state for them. So a much needed win for Toronto. What did you think of this match?
Yeah, I did think it was interesting. It was a Neslo from Toronto, and we've talked about at least earlier in the season, Toronto looked like the best S&D team in the game. I think now it's probably Atlanta, although Atlanta did lose that one to Miami, but just based on how well they played in search against LAT, probably put Atlanta at the top of my list without looking at the records. But nonetheless, yeah, I mean, Snoopy was really, you know, the one guy on Boston who played pretty well in this series when it had 111 kills and a 1.25 KD. Rest of the team, like at least Purge and Cammy, were 0.99 and 0.98, so just under uh, a neutral KD. But yeah, outside of Snoopy playing well, just not, a great statistical performance from Boston. And that's, they win the hard points. That's at least something to take home there. But, Toronto got it done in the 2-3-5. And Kleenex goes 9-3 in map 2, Insights 1-6. Like, it is what it is in the search. Purge dropped 8 in the search, so that's interesting for the map 2. And then Stoopy drops 11 in map 5. Cammy's got 9. It just isn't enough. So yeah, I don't know. I think I've, at this point I've just, I think I've been pretty vocal about just not being super high on Boston at this point. Like I think it was cool for them to match their win total from last season already at this point. But I don't, I don't know. It's just weird because like they're winning the hard points and they're winning hard points against a good team like Toronto. So it's not like they're a terrible team or anything like that. I don't think they're anything more than a middle of the pack squad at this point, and it seems like they're on a downward trajectory just based on their hot start.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. They're just like pretty inconsistent, I would say. Like, they've lost the last 2 matches. They won 2 before that. They lost 2 before that, and then they were kind of trading wins. Like, so literally, if you go back to, this is post holiday break, they lose their first match, they win, they lose, they win. They lose, they lose, they win, they win, they lose, they lose. That is literally how the Boston Breach's post-holiday break has gone in the CDL. So they haven't had any more than 2 straight wins. They, granted, haven't had any more than 2 straight losses, but not being able to string wins together on a consistent basis is going to hurt you. If you look at like what has kind of plagued them so far this season, it's been the swing mode, as it's like to call, control.
Yeah.
They're basically 500 in hardpoint and S&D combined. They're 15-10 in hardpoint, 10-13 in S&D. So really just almost exactly perfect in 500. And then control, they're 4-10. So like that really has hurt them very bad so far this season. And, it's the least important game mode until it really matters, and then you really need to win those maps, and they just haven't been able to do that consistently, and it kind of puts them where they are now, where, like you said, they feel like they're on a downward trajectory, and even if they're not trending downward, they're not in a good enough position where they can feel comfortable with where they are. Right now, I believe they're like 8th place in the standings. And granted, we still have months and months before we really, before it really becomes official, and those guys have to get into champs and all of that. But still, like, they're not in a comfortable position where they can just ignore, things not going 100% to plan. And that hurts me to say, but maybe there's a roster change coming in the near future for this team. They're probably going to wait at least until, I would imagine, after Major 2, just to see what this team does. But they're going to have to pick up some wins. Maybe the minor could be a good place to do it, and just hopefully pick up some more points, so it's not as, kind of down and gloomy. But I still believe that Boston is winning champs. So we're still on that. I'm at least on that train. I'll pick you up later. And then we have Sunday, February 23rd. We started off with Minnesota Vegas. Minnesota, we win 3-0. They win hard point by 100. They dominate S&D, dominate control. Pretty straightforward. Do you want to talk 25 minutes on Vegas and everything that's gone wrong?
Nope. All I gotta say now, Vegas officially 0-19 in hard point, so it's worth keeping up our counter on that front. And then Clayster did have a tweet after the match, said incredibly frustrating performance out of us so far. I want everyone to know that we're doing everything we can to right the ship and get some wins on the board. Full faith that we're a better team than we've been showing. We just have to translate our practice into match day. And I kind of, unintentionally echoed some of that sentiment in when I was talking about Vegas earlier. And that's just, I mean, that's all we know about the Vegas camp right now is what we've heard from Clay, really. And if he says they've been better in practice than what they're showing in match day and the potential's there, like, he's not going to come out and say, like, oh, we're just terrible and blow it up.
No, this is exactly how we practice.
But, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. We got something here from Clay, so, he's not going to say like he's lost all faith in the team because that would be tragic. But I don't know, and I think for now, same mindset as it just had just a couple minutes ago when we were last talking about Vegas. Like, until they give us something else to talk about, going to be pretty straightforward with these series. And it's really, I mean, I don't like this mindset, but like I wouldn't be surprised if some players heading into a match against Vegas are just like, yeah, I don't care what I end up doing, like, map wise, like I want to put up stats against these guys and I want to, pad the stats, build the KD. And that's where that goes back to the conversation we had about like the teams not wanting to scrim them and stuff like that. Like if you go in with that mindset, it potentially could create some bad habits, bad tendencies for when you're playing the better team. So it's really, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here throughout the rest of the season. But yeah, until we get more to talk about on the Vegas run, we don't got to spend more time.
I'm sure teams are also looking at them like, let's get back on track. Like,
look at OpTic.
Yeah, like Minnesota, they lost their first series of the weekend. They're like, all right, that sucked. All right, we got Vegas now. And then, like you said, OpTic, they have them in the first round of the minor. It's like, all right, like let's get some map wins under our belt. Like we're just getting back on track, and it's like a preseason game. We're just ramping up, and we're trying to get back into the swing of things. And I think, honestly, that's probably the best way to look at it. Like, let's not overlook it. Like, let's not take it for granted, but like, let's really focus on figuring whatever we need to figure out in this match so we can like feel good about it and like go on and move and hopefully, kind of carry some of that momentum, even if it is like, just kind of beating up on a team that you should beat. At least it happened and you can have some momentum going into the next match.
I mean, again, sports analogy, but we talk about, other teams like, especially really college football, college basketball, like teams will put some weaker opponents at the beginning of their schedule before they hit into conference play. And I know from personal experience, the joke always growing up was like, oh, you played the school for the deaf and the blind or whatever. And that's a little probably insensitive for today's times, but that's what I always heard growing up. And then when I went to college, before we went on our spring trip, my first 3 years, we went to Myrtle Beach. My last year, we went to Florida for spring training. Before we did that, the first game we would play every year was against a school called Baptist Bible. And I don't even know if it was Baptist Bible College or Baptist Bible University, whatever it was, but they were not a good team. And they were our first game almost every year. And we were not a good team, and there were some times where we thought we were going to lose to this team named Baptist Bible, but pretty sure we beat them every year before, and that's just what it was. It was basically like a tune-up before you go play. Like we went down to Myrtle Beach. We played teams from like Illinois and Texas, and they were kicking the shit out of us. And it is what it is. But yeah, I think like right now that's got to be. You don't want to create bad tendencies when playing this Vegas Falcons team. You want to go into the match, take them as seriously as you possibly can, and just do what you know is right and take care of business and move on.
Yeah, for sure. Next up, LAT versus Toronto. I kind of teased it earlier in the episode, and how Toronto really need that win against Boston, considering they had a tough opponent. They played LAT, which it turns out LAT is a very tough opponent. It was a very close hard point, 250-242, one of the closest maps of the entire week. And then LAT, they just end up sweeping. They dominate the S&D. They win 3-2 on control. And the Thieves are kind of back into a groove, I guess. Like at least they looked, as good as they have in recent weeks. So I think that's a pretty good sign for LAT.
Toronto should have won map 1. They were, I think it's, I don't know the rotation on, I think it's P2 for like the garage, and then it goes to the stage is P3. But whatever the numbers are for the hills, Toronto like had control of that garage hill, lost it like towards the end, and then started to set up on stage. And like the timing of where they were by the stage area, and they died, and because they died like before that hill popped, they spawned back at the old hill and garage, and that really was like, it was just really bad timing, and when they just couldn't die at that exact time when they did, and LAT capitalized on it. But like Jodeci's dropped 49, which we've talked. Xnid dropped 52 on a vault hard point. Like if 49 is the highest on a red card we see this year, I would not be surprised. That was just an absurd performance out of him. And we talked about like the rivalry or the how do we phrase it? The revenge match. This was indirectly we talked about the revenge match from Envoy and Scrapp's perspective against Toronto. We didn't really think about it, at least I didn't, for Jodeci's against his team last year in LAT, and he showed up here in this map 1. So it was a really strong performance out of him. Unfortunate Toronto didn't get the win. They really should have. It's just LAT clutched up at a really good time and were able to close things out. But yeah, after that, it was 3-2 in control is just a control thing that we see with controls. But then really the search was pretty lopsided, all considered. Hydra drops 11. Scraps 8 and 4, so strong performance out of the LAT boys. And then after the fact, we get a pretty interesting tweet from the LAT team Twitter page where they quoted that I believe that at Grayson guy is the CEO or owner of like all the Toronto.
It's like Overactive, right? Is the ownership group.
Whatever, he's somewhere in that position. He had a tweet from September 25th, 2024, will be a better team than LAT in 2025. And LAT put that in a picture with Scrap and Envoy, and Scrap pointing out saying, damn, that's crazy. So I thought that was a pretty fire tweet to, we've had some good ones over the years from teams on official pages, but that definitely caught my eye after this match.
I always appreciate those people that talk a bunch of shit, like when there's just no point to do so. Like, why would you, as a team owner, why would you ever tweet something? Like, imagine Jerry Jones going out and is like, we're going to beat the shit out of the Eagles this year.
Well, he does that.
Yeah, and people clown on him for being an idiot. He just hired Brian Schottenheimer. But, like, that's just a ridiculous thing to say. But I appreciate Adam and Grayson. I appreciate him for saying it. That's just like, that was a wild thing to say regardless of like the circumstance.
But again, like going back to the Clayster thing, like what's he gonna say? I didn't look up that tweet.
We're hope to be a great team this year,
But I mean, I'm assuming that tweet was in reference to something after the whole like Scrap and Envoy leaving Toronto to join LAT situation happened. And it could have been, there was like that hoodie org drama earlier in the off season. So maybe it was around that time, but yeah, regardless, I think like you said, there are some times where saying what's on your mind isn't necessarily the best.
As a fan, as somebody who enjoys the drama, keep tweeting. Like that's just tweet through it. As if I were like a consultant, I would say, hey, Adam, how about you step away from the keyboard right now, sir? Like, we're not going to have you be tweeting about hoodie orgs or about having a better season than LAT. We're just going to let it ride. Like, whatever happens, happens. And if you guys win, maybe talk a little shit. But other than that, like, let's chill. But I mean, as a fan, of course, I'm cool with that. He should tweet more often. He should start live tweeting these matches like Nadeshot does, and he should say Toronto needs to be in the lab for the next week straight to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Speaking of Nadeshot, did you see what happened with him this weekend on Marvel Rivals?
Yes, I did, and I saw that LAG also tweeted that, I think, after, I think it was, no, who was it?
Crone tweeted.
It was Crone, yeah.
GG. Yeah, it was after this match, so that reminded me of that. For those who didn't see it, Nade Shot intended to type in a post-match of Marvel Rivals GG shitters, and he had some ones and threes in there to try and like get it through the auto filter. But Marvel Rivals filtered it to asterisk 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 3ER, which could be perceived as a racial slur and not
Could be.
shitters, which is what Nate Shot typed if you watch the clip. And Nate Shot noticed immediately how bad it looked. It was like, oh God, I can't believe this. So that was a funny clip. If you didn't see it, it's got to be on Reddit or Twitter somewhere. Go check it out. And then Crone had a pretty funny tweet just quoting that after this match. So this matchup, this was one of those matchups heading into this week that we were both excited for, thinking it was going to be a pretty good match. Map 1 definitely lived up to the hype. But other than that, it was pretty convincing victory for LAT.
Last match of the weekend was Boston versus C9. I told you before we went on the air how I was watching earlier in the day, and then I went and did something. I came back and I turned it on, and it was 2-0 C9. I think they were up 1-0 in the control, and I was like, oh, okay, there's probably another match after this, right? Because it was only 6 o'clock Eastern. And I look at the schedule, and this was the last match, and I think it was 10 minutes later, the series was over, and I was like, well, damn, that was a quick day. And the quick week, I think that's probably the earliest that we've gotten done with matches. Granted, it was 3 matches, so it's okay, but still 3 matches, and all 3 were 3-0s. And this one was just kind of depressing because I'm a big Boston guy. I've basically been a Boston and Snoopy truther for the last year and a half. So I feel like a connection. This is my new LAG thing. But I was just damn, this is really lopsided. And we haven't really seen Boston get this dominated other than those Atlanta FaZe series. And I don't know, I saw that you put something about there potentially being some server cheese and stuff, but I mean, that's just kind of be expected with every Cloud9 series, I think. I don't remember a single series that they've had where they've won, I guess, that hasn't been, followed by some kind of tweet or comment about the servers. But yeah, this was a depressing series for me as a Boston guy. What do you think?
Yeah, so I didn't see anything from the players themselves on a server's perspective. I think that was just again, I was watching the Scump Watch Party, and Cloud9 kind of just dominated this match so hard that Scump and Methods and the guys were speculating maybe something had to be going on.
That's what I'm going to go with too.
Lopsided. So we don't know for sure what the case may be, but we did mention on the last episode C9 playing from LA, Boston, and based on everything we know about Boston as an organization before this year, potentially playing from Boston, that's a cross-country battle, could be some internet stuff. And that could explain what happened here, because really this wasn't close. It was just a dominant performance from Cloud9. All 4 of their guys had positive KDs. The lowest was a 1.29. And everybody on Boston was negative. The highest KD was Snoopy at a 0.73. So it was really just pure dominance from Cloud9. Here's Sib, 51 and 27 for a 1.89 KD. The search was a 6-1, and it was a 5.5 minute map. It was just a dominant performance from Cloud9. And that's, we've talked a lot about Cloud9 and how they haven't lived up to expectations. And I'm not saying this match is we're getting the Cloud9 that we thought we were having, because there's still that uncertainty around the online play and whatnot. But this is definitely a little more indicative of what some people were expecting from Cloud9 heading into the season. And that's just, this was a good week for Cloud9, all things considered. They play Vegas, so they get their quote unquote free win there. But then to add another 3-0 to the end of that, I'm pretty sure, did they go 2-5 in the, they might have went 1-6 in the major 1 qualifiers. So they might have won more maps.
Yeah, they went 1-6. They only beat Minnesota.
So they won more series this week than they did on the first set of qualifiers. So they're already in a better position than they were last major.
Yeah, and I think so. Boston has now lost twice to Cloud9 because they lost at the major and in the major two qualifiers. Um, you also just look at Toronto's match against C9. We talked about that last week, I believe, and that was kind of like there was some drama about the servers with that match because again, it's a Toronto versus LA match, so the servers are screwed up or whatever, and Cloud9 just dominated that match too, and that was really surprising because Toronto is like considered like a top 4, top 5 team, and C9 certainly wasn't. And then we get this match. Obviously, Boston is not on the same level as Toronto, but still like a very dominant performance. And we just saw Boston play Toronto very, very strong. Like it went down to a game 5. I'm just going to use that excuse. I don't know if it's correct. I'm just going to run with it. But yeah, that was the entire reason that Boston lost like this. They would have certainly just demolished demolished C9 otherwise. But yeah, C9, they're regardless of the circumstances, like they needed these wins, and like you take them however you get them. Like in Major 1 qualifiers, they lost 3 game 5s, which really stings. Like that just another win or two, another map win or two. Like that's a big difference. They lost a game 5 in the first minor to Carolina, who got to the finals. They're kind of, and of course they lost in game 5 to Vancouver last weekend. So like for them, it's been kind of like thin margins. It hasn't been like blowouts necessarily. Of course, they had that one match against OpTic near the beginning of the season, but overall, like they've had these close matches that they've lost more times than not. But for right now, like they've gotten 3 3-0s so far in the Major 2 qualifiers, and they are looking better than they have at any point this season right now. And that's really surprising because we were fully expecting a roster change, or, we thought that Pred might be going to C9, and, obviously that didn't end up happening. But, they look like they're in a good spot right now. We're going to see if they can continue that momentum into the minor and then keep that through and, end the Major 2 qualifiers on a high note. But it's got to feel good for C9 with how much stuff they've had to go through with this online scenario that they have, where it just, I feel like every win and every loss is kind of shrouded in that, I don't know, the controversy, but just like we don't know if this is like the correct result, so to speak. But they're winning, and that's a big thing, at least for them, and it's really going to help them in the standings so far. So the Major 2 qualifier standings. Let's just go through them. Obviously, we have the minor coming up this weekend or next weekend, and we talked about it on the last episode, maybe 2 episodes ago now. But the minor is not based on the Major 2 qualifier standings. They were based on the standings of the CDL after Major 1. So before any Major 2 qualifiers were even played, the minor bracket was set. So these qualifier standings have nothing to do with what's going to happen next weekend. But the Major 2 qualifier standings, as it is right now, we have a 4-way tie for first place, all with 30 CDL points. The LA Thieves, Vancouver Surge, Cloud9 New York, and Minnesota Rocker. Then we have 4 teams tied for 5th with 20 points. Atlanta, Carolina, Boston, and Toronto. Miami are in 9th with 10 points. And then 3 teams are currently winless in the qualifiers, tied for 10th. LAG, Vegas, and OpTic. Obviously they're not technically tied, any of these teams, like, because you can get all those tiebreakers, but they all have the same points right now. Like technically LAT and Vancouver will be like at the very top because they're undefeated and they've won all all 3 of their matches. But you get my point. But that's the standings right now.
And it's worth mentioning too, like you said, like that the individual map record is a factor for the tiebreakers. And as things stand right now, with OpTic at 0-9, if the major was to happen next weekend, Vegas Falcons would have a higher seed than OpTic, despite them both being winless, just because Vegas have won 2 maps and OpTic haven't. It's an unfair comparison because Vegas has played an extra series over OpTic, but you get my point. And that's on the Scump Watch Party. Scump basically said it like we kind of OpTic has to win out, is what he was saying. Like we kind of got to win out to guarantee a winners bracket spot, because even if they win 3 of 4, because of the 09 map count, like they would have to win like 3-0s, even, and then if they lose one more, just because the map count isn't in their favor. So it's going to be interesting where OpTic's really going to have to pick it up here. But like we'll talk more about the minor and those upcoming matches later. But they got the favorable draw against Vegas to potentially kickstart a run for them.
Yeah, and the minor, if you weren't around for the first one, it's a single elimination tournament. It's online. It's involving all 12 of the CDL teams. So there are 4 teams that get first round buys, and they have changed. So the first minor had a best of 5 grand final. This one will have a best of 7. So that's the biggest change from minor 1 and minor 2. The 4 teams that get the bye: Atlanta, Toronto, LAT, and Carolina, because those were the 4 teams according to the CDL standings after major 1. So this is the last minor of the season. We should add that as well, because there aren't any minors before major 3 or before major 4. So this is a really big key moment for these teams to earn CDL points, which do not affect the major 2 qualifier standings, but they affect the CDL season standings. Therefore, they can help you qualify and improve your seeding for champs at the end of the season, which is, of course, we talked about it, the most important part of this season. Pick 'em so far this year. You are 59-33. You went 7-3 this week. I am 52-40, and I went 5-5 this week. Boston did not do me any favors. But yeah, that about does it. We're about an hour and a half, close to an hour and a half in. We appreciate you guys listening and watching. Please subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. You can type in Ego Chall Podcast on YouTube and it should pop up. If you could, please make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I believe we were at like 208 subscribers the last time I checked. So getting close, 209. So I think we might have picked up one over the last few days. Trying to get to 300 by the end of the CDL season. Daily videos should be coming back this week. I'm getting more motivated to do things just in general. So hopefully daily videos will be back. I'll clip up some parts of the podcast. And if you don't want to, or I guess if you're listening to this part, you probably already listened to the entire podcast. But if you don't want to suggest an entire hour and a half long podcast to someone, maybe you just want to give them like 12 minutes on OpTic Texas or whatever, us shit talking the Vegas Falcons, you can suggest a video on that rather than just the entire podcast. So be on the lookout for that. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2 Ks, at Pres Byers, podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink. That's JBINKK. We're at more than 40 days consecutively streaming. So you can follow him on Twitch if you enjoy League of Legends action. We'll be back probably on Wednesday night to talk about the minor. We'll be previewing the minor, giving our predictions for what's going to happen, giving our thoughts on who might win, kind of I guess the storylines, heading in, because, we've talked about a lot of these teams, but we get to talk about them in a different light because it's a tournament rather than just a single match. So teams can really change their fortunes, or at least how we view them in just a few days in that tournament. But yeah, we'll be back on Wednesday night to do that, do the podcast. If you want to watch live, you can watch on Twitch and YouTube, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. And of course you can go to YouTube and watch it as well. And then the podcast version will be back into your feeds on Thursday morning. That does it for me. Bing, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you guys as always for all the support. Not, a ton of unique storylines this week. Like we said earlier, a lot of 3-0s, but were some interesting matches and developments, and We'll keep an eye on the Gentle Mate situation with Priesta potentially coming in, and we'll potentially have that and the minor to talk about next time we're live, which, people have been talking about wanting more 2Ks, 5Ks tournaments, and might might be the last time we have something like that this year. But if minor goes well again, we, based on the community update we got with minor 1 being a success in the eyes of the league, if minor 2 goes well, maybe this is something we see more of moving forward. So if you guys like the minor, make sure you're commenting on CDL feeds and whatnot, and letting them know your thoughts and everything like that. And maybe it's something we'll see more of in the future. But yeah, minor 2 is right around the corner. We'll be back next week to get you all caught up to speed and ready for that. And yeah, until then, everyone have a good one. And remember to send the chow.